present before the court with counsel, Mr. Shapiro, Mr. Cochran, Mr. Blazer, Mr. Scheck, Mr. Neufeld, people represented by Mr. Darden and Mr. Goldberg. The jury is not present. Counsel, anything we need to take up before we proceed with our next witness? Mr. Goldberg, my recollection is that you had some exhibits to mark.
Yes, I wanted to mark the printout of the picture of the tube. I think it's 231, Your Honor. And also the little disposable plastic pipette. Maybe we could mark this as part of the 163 series, the bag of items.
No, I think because it will appear there out of logical order, I would suggest that we give that a new and separate number.
So you want this to be 232?
Yes. 232, Mrs. Robertson. All right.
Thank you.
Your Honor, the next witness is the tow truck driver. He's being transported here by DA investigators. They have radioed us and said that they should be here around 10 minutes after 9. Right. I informed the clerk as soon as I found out. Apparently he was here this morning. He had left the document, the impound documents, and they'd taken him back to Santa Monica to pick up the documents, and he's on his way back now.
All right. And who is this next witness?
That'll be Mr. Douroux. Dr. Cotton.
Robin Cotton. Certainly.
Your Honor, I have arranged with Mr. Hodgman to have Dr. Michael Bodden and Dr. Barbara Wolf here today. They are presently, actually Dr. Bodden is testifying next door for the prosecution in another case. And the purpose of their visit for us is to get microscopic slides of tissue from the autopsy of both decedents. This has been agreed to by both sides. The only issue that has come up now is the cost of those slides. We are informed that the standard procedure is for the county coroner to do those slides, and they are provided at no cost to the defense. In this case, the coroner's office did not do any slides, and they are now allowing us to do the slides, but at a cost of $85 per slide. We understand that the true cost for such slides in laboratories is $4 to $5. I tried to reach Mr. Hodgman on Friday, and he had a family emergency and was unable to return my call, although we did get word back from someone else in the district attorney's office. We need the court's guidance. Those slides are going to be done this morning, but we, as I understand, there are going to be numerous slides necessary, and I don't know the exact amount, but we would like to see if the court can give us some assistance in providing these at a reasonable cost and not at an inflated cost that is artificially set by the coroner.
Mr. Darden, do you know anything about this?
No, I don't, and Mr. Hodgman is upstairs in his office. If he's listening, perhaps he can come down and speak to Mr. Shapiro while we wait for Mr. Douroux, and they can settle the matter, if at all possible.
That would be acceptable.
All right. Anything else we can take up before we start with the tow truck driver?
I filed a letter with the court and counsel this morning. I followed up on your suggestion based on Mr. Blazer's hypothetical and good faith basis for his questions about EDTA on prosecution evidence. As you recall, Mr. Blazer alleged that their experts have reviewed our reports, which is all they could have done because they've never tested any of the samples from the gate or the sock for the presence of EDTA. And I requested Mr. Cochran orally, and now I've done it in writing. There are no such witnesses on the defense witness list who are qualified in the field of GCMS, which is the form of testing that would have to be done. So it appears that the defense has violated the court's discovery order by, at a minimum, based on Mr. Blazer's offer of proof that their experts have reviewed our work and come to contrary conclusions. Our experts The FBI has determined that there is no EDTA on 117 or 13A1. So Mr. Blazier's offer of proof was that their experts have reviewed that material.
Well, Mr. Harmon, forgive me for interrupting you, but your request was for a hearing on this matter on Wednesday.
Right. I just, we had time. I thought I'd bring it up that things are getting interesting, Your Honor.
How about if we do it Wednesday?
That'd be fine.
All right. Any other housekeeping matters while we're waiting? Mr. Goldberg?
Just briefly, on the magnetic strips that we used on the defense blood vial chart, I believe those probably should be marked as another exhibit as well.
However, my recollection is that Mr. Fairtlow took some type of digital photograph of that.
He apparently did, to preserve the way that the chart looked once it was completed. Is it possible for us to mark both the magnetic strips and the photograph that was taken of the chart after it was finished?
I would say the photograph itself is what we ought to use rather than the strips themselves.
Well, unfortunately, the resolution on the photograph doesn't appear to be high enough to read all of the markings on it clearly.
All right, well, I would suggest then at a time that the court is in recess that that chart be put back together in that manner and that a still photograph by somebody from the district attorney's photo lab be substituted for the digital photograph. Rather than because the magnetic strips themselves without something to stick them on are useless as an exhibit.
And we can then mark the photograph separately, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Thank you.
Seems to be a more reasonable way to do that.
Maybe we can mark this one now as
233.
233. Can we make it 233A? And
Well, let's make it 233, and then we'll, hearing no objection from the defense, we'll substitute a real photograph with conventional photography when that becomes available.
Thank you.
All right.
Your Honor, one quick item.
Yes.
We have a letter that we prepared for the court requesting sanctions against Mr. Goldberg for the series of improper questions that he asked on Thursday and Friday. We're asking for a curative instruction as well as sanctions, and we'd like to present that letter to the court now for the court's consideration. I believe you have it.
Yes, I do. I have not had the opportunity to read it since it was just handed to me. All right, we'll take that, since it deals with EDTA as well, we'll take that up Wednesday afternoon. Mr. Scheck.
One more housekeeping matter. I've asked Mr. Harmon since Thursday to inform us of the status of the combination of samples from the Bronco that was being tested by DOJ, whether that RFLP analysis had started, as I indicated to the court. I was told as of Monday of last week it hadn't, and I think that creates an issue to be resolved.
Yes, we've discussed that informally previously.
When should we do this, and what's the court's pleasure?
Well, obviously, if that testing has not even begun yet, then there are no results to report, so there's nothing to be produced in court, so I don't see any tremendous urgency to do it this week.
Well,
and we have a plethora of other issues to deal with Wednesday.
I understand. My only concern is before the witness from the Department of Justice testifies about results from the Bronco, which are going to be affected by the tests that they proposed to do 7 weeks ago, that they did not begin after they obtained permission of the court to do so, which I would submit on its face is deliberate, that we have to have some resolution as to...
Well, what do you suggest timing-wise?
Well, first of all, Mr. Harmon hasn't informed us as to what the status of the testing is. I want to be careful in my representation since my information is a bit old, but my suggestion is that we resolve that issue before Mr. Sims testified from the Department of Justice, which could be at the end of this week or the beginning of next week.
Mr. Darden, do you have any information about that, or do you want to defer to Mr. Harmon?
I'd like to defer to Mr. Harmon, Your Honor.
I'm not sure what the question is, Judge.
The question is the status of the combination RFLP testing.
It's
DOJ.
ongoing, and Dr. Blake has open door. The invisible but ubiquitous Blake is there more than I am, so I'm not sure. He's never been denied access to any information. I can tell you Mr. Sims is not doing that work because he's down here now, so nothing's going on right now. But I'd rather, if there's a specific legal issue involved in it, I'd be happy to respond to a legal issue. But in terms of where the testing is, Dr. Blake can call up there anytime and be precise. But it hasn't been completed, obviously.
All right, well, Mr. Harmon, when do you anticipate, after Dr. Cotton testifies, who do you anticipate will be after Dr. Cotton?
Mr. Sims. So he's here until, so wherever things were left when he left work on Friday, that's where they are.
All right, then Friday afternoon, 1:30, we'll take this up. Mrs. Robertson, would you note that? Remind me to cancel my dentist appointment. Again? All right, Mr. Darden, any word on the whereabouts of your witness?
No, Your Honor.
Well, could we perhaps start with Dr. Cotton?
You want to start with DNA and interrupt it with the tow truck driver?
No, I'd like to do something this morning.
Why don't we check? We've been on the record 12 minutes. We've been accused of misconduct twice. We're setting the record pace at this point, Your Honor.
Once every 6 minutes.
Yeah, one every 6 minutes. Besides, Miss Martinez's birthday was this, where did she go? There she is. Her birthday was this weekend.
She knew when to get out of Dodge.
Yeah.
Ah, the ubiquitous Mr. Hodgman.
And his sidekick, Mr. Yokelson.
Good morning, sir. There was some dispute that Mr. Shapiro raised concerning cost of production of autopsy slides from the coroner's office. Do you have any information about that? Not that I
Yes.
want to get involved in referring a dispute.
Yes, very well. I'm not so sure it can be characterized as a dispute. It's simply the policy and protocol of the coroner's office, of which I informed Mr. Shapiro by letter last week. And I received a phone message Friday indicating Mr. Shapiro wanted to try and work something out in that regard, but I don't control that department, and that's between the coroner's office and the defense. I understand Drs. Bodden and Wolf are over there today. I had spoken to Dr. Wolf Friday morning, just to make sure she had the proper information with regard to the arrangements as well as the cost procedures, and she did not raise any objection at that time. Mr. Shapiro's call did come in after that. So it's something over which I really have no control, Your Honor.
All right, well, Mr. Shapiro's raised the issue. Mr. Shapiro, I think the burden is on your shoulders at this point to indicate that those costs are somehow out of the ordinary or unlike those that are assessed to other individuals seeking this information.
Your Honor, I can just relate what has been related to me by our experts, and that is that in the normal course, these are provided for at no cost whatsoever, and that the medical costs and laboratory costs that are involved are between $4 and $5 a slide. In addition, since Mr. Hodgman is here, I don't even, in his letter, they indicated that the approximate cost, and I don't have the figures in front of me, of Dr. Lakshmanan and Dr. Golden to watch our experts do this is approximately $500 an hour for us, to have them watch us do what they should have done. And we just think this is a violation of due process. We have no choice but to go ahead with it because the doctors are here. But we would ask the court to intervene and to conduct a hearing regarding the real fair cost of this, and that we should not be gouged because it's being done by the defense and not by the prosecution.
All right, about the only thing I can suggest, Mr. Shapiro, is if you want to file a motion to that effect, you're welcome to do so. It would be my inclination to, since it would involve a coroner's policy, which would apply not only to this case but other cases, is then ask the supervising judge, Judge Basque, to set the matter for a hearing, since it would be a system-wide impact, since some other judge should probably hear that issue and not take our time with that.
Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor, and it would indeed be a system-wide impact because I am informed that this policy applies across the board for all defendants, that there is nothing unusual that's being done in this case, that there's no denial of due process. This is simply the normal protocol and usual procedure of the coroner's office. So nothing special is being done for the defendant in this case.
Okay. All right.
Witness will be here any minute.
Well, shall I put the jury in the box and we can all wait?
That's no fun. Yeah. Wait until the defense case, Your Honor. He is on the S level. There's only one elevator operating from the S level
All right.
up this morning.
Your Honor, there is one additional thing that I just want to add for the record, so the record is clear. In addition, they want a copy of our slides that we are doing, and they want to charge us $85 per slide that we are doing to turn over to them because they didn't do it.
Sounds like a good business to me. All right. We'll, if you want to file a formal motion, we'll look into it.
I will. Thank
All right.
you, Your Honor.
You could go in the chambers and read, some of the sanction motions.
Well, the problem is if I leave, then the audience has to be cleared. Then we have to go through all of that rigmarole each and every time. So I just as soon stay here upon your representation. That person will be here in 2 or 3 minutes.
Well, okay.
Thought of an interesting sidebar we could have.
All right. Well, perhaps you could ask Mr. Delavine for some advice. Never mind.
I thought maybe he was here.
He could be.
If I can have 60 seconds outside with defense counsel, so that I can speak to Mr. Counsel.
Quiet, please.
Ms. Clark, what's your time estimate for the next witness?
I'm sorry,
What is your time estimate for the next witness?
people's time estimate or the estimate for cross?
Your time estimate.
About 15 minutes, if
Okay.
that,
All right.
very brief. So that means, that's direct, so cross, figure it'd be about 2 hours.
Depends on what the issues are here. All right. Which of the tow truck drivers is this?
I'm sorry,
Which of the tow
The
truck?
first.
First tow
the
truck.
first one, who towed to Rubens, the creek ship.
Okay. you ask the lawyers to step in with their witness, please? Mrs. Robertson? All right, Mr. Darden, people ready? All right, Deputy McNair, let's have the jurors, please.
I believe Mr. Clark is going to handle Dr. Cotton. Yes,
All right, how about this witness now?
I am.
All right. Let the record reflect that we've now been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right, Mr. Darden, you may call the people's next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. The people call Mr. Douroux, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Douroux, would you come over here to the witness stand, please? Raise your right hand and face the clerk, please.
Raise your right hand, please. You do solemnly swear that the testimony you may give in the cause not pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please have a seat at the witness stand and state and spell your first and last names for the record.
Bernie Douroux,
Please spell your first and last names, please.
Berniedouroux.
All right, Mr. Darden.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Douroux, who are you working for on June 13, 1994?
Ruban Motors.
Ruban Motors?
Yes.
Okay, could you pull the microphone a little closer there and speak into it?
Okay, Ruban Motors.
Sounded the same for some reason. Okay.
Is this better?
Okay.
Ruban Motors.
Okay. And Ruban Motors is a towing,
It's
automobile
police
towing
impound.
company?
Yes.
Okay. And what do you do for Ruban Motors?
Impound vehicles at LAPD. Should request have impounded or private towing.
Mrs. Robertson, would you crank that?
Okay, thank you. On the afternoon of June 13, at around 3:06 p.m., did you receive a radio call from your dispatcher?
Yes, we did.
And after receiving that radio call, did you go somewhere?
Yes, I did.
Where'd you go?
360 Rockingham.
Okay, why did you go to 360 Rockingham?
We were requested by LAPD to pick up a vehicle.
Okay. And what time did you arrive at 360 North Rockingham?
Approximately 3:30.
And did you speak to a police officer at that location?
I spoke to a couple of them, yes.
Okay. And were you given any instructions?
Yes, I did. Yes, I was.
Okay. What instructions were you given by the officers?
Not to touch the vehicle, not to open it, and to take it downtown.
Okay. And were you directed toward a certain vehicle or to a certain vehicle?
Yes, I was.
And what vehicle is that?
Ford Bronco.
Okay. The Ford Bronco that's been on?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Simpson's Ford Bronco?
Yes, sir.
And did you tow that Ford Bronco?
Yes, I did.
Did you touch it prior to hooking it up to your tow truck?
Not prior, but after I hooked it up, I did touch the front right tire, just to make sure it was locked. The steering column was locked.
Okay. Now, during the time that you were at 360 North Rockingham, did you ever see any civilian touch the Ford Bronco?
No, I didn't.
And did you ever touch the doors or the...
No, sir.
Did you look inside the Ford Bronco?
I glanced inside, but didn't check to see anything.
Okay, you took a glance inside?
Just to make sure it wasn't full-time four-wheel drive. This little button sometimes tells you if it's four-wheel, full-time, but there was nothing.
Okay. Now, to take this glance inside the vehicle, did you open the door?
No, sir.
Did you ever touch the door handle?
No, sir.
Okay. What did you do to take this glance inside the Ford Bronco?
Just looked like that, and that was it. Okay. Took a quick peek.
Could you tell whether or not the Ford Bronco was locked?
Yes, it was locked because it had the buttons were down on the Bronco.
Okay. It was locked when you first saw it?
Yes, sir.
Did you unlock that vehicle?
No, sir.
And did you tow that vehicle?
Yes, sir, I did.
Where did you tow the Ford Bronco to?
To Parker Center, to Print Shed, over here.
Okay. To Parker Center over here on Los Angeles
Yes,
Street?
sir.
To the print shed?
Hold on.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Douroux, would you allow Mr. Darden and the other lawyers to finish asking the question before you start to
Okay,
answer?
yes, sir.
So you just did it right now.
Okay.
The problem we have is that you speak very softly. The court reporter has to be able to write down everything that is said. If you start to speak when Mr. Darden is still speaking, she can't take down what's being said. All right? Thank you, sir. Just let everybody finish their questions. Mr. Darden.
Okay.
What time, sir, did you leave Rockingham with the Bronco?
Approximately 3:40.
Okay. And what time did you arrive downtown at Parker Center? If you know.
It took me about an hour to get there. So probably about 4:40, 4:30, something like that.
And did you arrive at the print shed?
I was told to meet someone at the shed. There was nobody there. So I had to go out to the front of Parker Center and request for the detective.
Okay, so you arrived at the print shed and there was no one there?
Yes, sir.
And you say that you went inside Parker Center?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And why did you do that?
To let the officer know, or the desk person, that I was there. I had the Bronco, and I was supposed to meet a detective. And he called the detective. They came down, and we went down to the print shed.
Okay. And where was the Bronco during the time that you were speaking to the officers inside Parker Center?
In front of Parker Center.
Okay. Was there media there?
A few feet away, well, actually about 15 yards away.
Okay. Did anyone pay or seem to pay any attention to the Ford Bronco?
No, sir.
You see anybody approach the Ford Bronco
No,
at that
sir.
time?
No, sir.
Okay. And after you spoke to the officers inside Parker Center, what did you do next?
We went back to the truck and stayed with the vehicle until the detective came out.
Okay. And at that point, did you return to the print shed?
Yes, sir, we did.
Okay. Along with the detective?
Yes, sir.
Now, the print shed, is this a locked facility?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And how do you know that?
We had opened it with a key. There was steel doors, and it's all locked from the inside.
Okay. And so you saw the detective open the locked doors?
Yes, sir, I did.
And what did you do after that?
Backed the Bronco in, unhooked it. He took information down off the impound sheet, and that was it.
Did you see the detective open the Ford Bronco?
No, I didn't.
And when you left the Ford Bronco at the print shed, was it still locked?
Yes, sir, it was.
Now, at some point you left the print shed, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And as you left the print shed, did you notice whether or not the detective locked the doors to the shed?
Yes, he did.
And how do you know that?
I saw him shut the doors behind me as I was leaving.
Your Honor, I have here a vehicle investigation impound report. May it be marked People's Next in order?
234.
Okay. And with the court's permission, after the witness completes his testimony, I'd like to substitute this document with the Xerox copy. Mr.
All right, hearing no objection.
Mr. Douroux, showing you what has been marked as People's 234. Is that a copy of the impound report?
Yes, sir, it is.
Now, is there a box on that report that indicates whether or not a vehicle was locked when it's recovered?
No, there isn't. It doesn't say. It just says keys, and it says no for keys. It doesn't indicate that it was locked. There's no box that shows it.
Now, let me direct your attention to the upper left-hand corner of the report. That portion entitled Stolen, Lost, Embezzled.
Yes.
Is there a box here that indicates whether or not the doors are locked?
Oh, yeah, right here.
Okay. Now, does that portion of the report apply only to stolen or stolen vehicles that are recovered, or does that box apply to vehicles that are impounded, like the Ford Bronco in this case?
Well, according to this, just to lost, stolen, and embezzled vehicles.
Okay. And have you been interviewed by the LAPD and DA investigators?
Yes, I have.
And have you also been interviewed by defense investigators?
Yes, I have.
Thank you.
Mr. Cochran?
Good morning, Mr. Douroux.
Good morning.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Douroux, you and I just met about 5 minutes ago in the hall for the first time. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir, it is.
And with regard to your towing of this vehicle, as I understand it, this took place on or about June 13th of 1994 in the afternoon. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And can you tell the jury, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what time you received a call in response to this, sir?
We received the call from the mic room, LAPD's mic room, at approximately 3:06.
And then you responded to that call and arrived at the location on Rockingham?
Yes, sir, around 3:31.
All right, about 3:31 in the afternoon?
Yes, sir.
And when you got to that location, was the media present at that time, sir?
Yes, they were.
And did you see a lot of media there?
Yes, there was.
While you were there at Rockingham, did you ever see a lady walk up or run up and touch this particular vehicle while you were there?
I know myself, no.
You never saw that personally?
No.
Did you become aware of that at some point?
I was told that when I was doing the interviews with the defense and with LAPD. They had mentioned it to me.
All right, so you learned about it afterwards,
Yes,
is that correct? With regard to this particular vehicle, prior to the time that you started prepared it for towing, did you have occasion to look at that vehicle, the exterior of the vehicle at all?
No, I didn't. Just after I hooked it up, just to make sure it was nothing, it wasn't for full-time four-wheel drive.
All right. You described for us that you touched, I guess, the front wheel part of the vehicle. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, the front right tire.
Did you have occasion to look at any of the doors of that vehicle at all?
No, I didn't.
And you didn't notice anything on the exterior of that vehicle that you can recall presently. Is that correct?
No, sir.
Did you have occasion to look at the driver's side door down by the sill, down at the bottom of that particular vehicle at all?
No, sir.
Never looked at that?
No, sir.
Did you see what appeared to be any coffee cup stains on the hood of that vehicle?
No, sir.
You didn't see that either?
No.
All right. So I understand this was a fairly routine tow for you at that time. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, it was.
The only thing different from this scene, from other scenes you've been to, was the fact there were a lot of media present. Is that correct?
That was it, yes.
All right. You were working by yourself that day, sir?
Well, there was 3 other drivers that day, but I was the one who got dispatched the call.
All right. When you say 3 other drivers, the 3 other drivers who responded to the call?
No, just on the shift.
Working for Rubens that day?
Yes.
But you responded to the call, and when you got there to Rockingham at about 3:30 in the afternoon, you were the only driver there. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. You talked to a police officer once you got to the Rockingham location, did you?
Yes, I did.
And do you know the name of that police officer?
I can't remember his name, no.
Was this police officer in civilian clothes, or was he in uniform?
He was in civilian. The one who instructed me where to take the Bronco was
He was in what?
in civilian clothes.
All right. You don't know his name?
No, sir.
All right. So at any rate, you then proceeded, as I understand your testimony, to hook this vehicle up and then to transport it downtown. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it was your understanding that you were going to meet a detective somewhere near in or about the print shed.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then you described for us that it took you perhaps an hour or more to drive easterly downtown to Parker Center to the print shed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Where is the print shed located, sir, downtown here in L.A.?
Directly behind Parker Center on San Pedro Street.
All right. And you went to that location, and did you see any detective when you first went there?
No, I didn't.
All right. So how long did you wait at that location?
Approximately 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes.
All right. And what time was that by now?
I'd say about 3 3:30, 3:40, somewhere around that time.
Let's see, no,
No, about 4:30. 1 second.
So about-
4:40, around that time, about an hour after I left Rockingham.
all right, so 4:30, 4:40.
Yes, sir.
All right. Did you talk to anybody at the print shed when you first got there?
There was nobody there.
All right, nobody was like locked?
Yes.
All right, sir. So then you waited about 10 minutes, and then thereafter, as I understand your testimony, you drove around to Parker Center, is that correct?
That's correct, to the front of Parker Center.
And you were by yourself at this point, and so when you went in to try to locate the detective, you left the vehicle on the street, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so how long were you away from that vehicle when you left it?
Approximately 3 minutes, just to go inside
All right, now what street did you park the vehicle on, sir?
Los Angeles.
On Los Angeles Street?
Yes, sir, right.
And is that in front of the Parker Center?
That's correct.
Out on the street, so you would be heading northbound on Los Angeles?
I thought it was eastbound.
Well, you're on Los Angeles Street, right?
Yeah, it was directed right in front of Parker Center, in front of the doors.
Okay.
So
All right.
I thought it was eastbound. Maybe.
All right, you headed toward Union Station, would you?
That's correct. Yeah.
Toward Olvera Street?
Yes.
So let's call that northbound.
Okay.
All right. And you parked the vehicle there in your vehicle, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you left it, and then you went inside Parker Center in the front doors of Parker Center.
Yes, sir.
When you left the vehicle to go inside, the media was outside also?
Yes, they were.
Can you approximate for the court and jury how many members of the media were there, sir?
And it was a group. I couldn't. Maybe 10, 15 more.
A group
Could
like
be
a
more.
pack of media?
Yeah, they were all hanging out on the
Like a
lawn.
pack? How about a swarm of media, Your Honor? So how many media?
I would say probably about 10, maybe more.
All right, so about 10 different
Yes.
cameras and that sort of thing.
Exactly.
And how far away were they from you at the time that you went inside, when you left the vehicle to go inside Parker Center?
It's about 15 yards.
15 yards away?
Yes,
And then you then left the vehicle and went inside, is that correct?
that's correct.
And you went inside to try to find a detective, is that correct?
I went inside and I asked the desk sergeant there, the person in charge. I had a Bronco with me from 360 Rockingham. He called upstairs and he told me the detective was on his way down.
All right. And then, and that's kind of at the front desk. When you walk inside Parker Center, it's at the front desk inside there, is
That's
that
correct.
All right. And during this time while you were inside, there was nobody outside with the Bronco at that point, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So your best recollection is you stayed inside for how long? Did you wait? Strike that. Did you wait for the detective inside?
No, sir, I didn't.
All right. After you talked with this desk sergeant, and you were told a detective would be coming down, did you go back outside then?
That's correct, I did.
All right. And then you walked back outside to the vehicle?
Yes, sir.
All right. And I presume it was still parked at the same place, is that right?
Yes, it was.
And did you wait outside with the vehicle at that point?
Yes, I did.
When you went back outside to wait for the detective, how long did you wait before the detective came out?
About 3 minutes.
All right, and
Less than 5 minutes.
less than 5 minutes?
Yes.
During that period of time, Mr. Douroux, did you have occasion to look at the exterior of the Bronco at all at that point?
No, sir.
So up until the time that you left that particular vehicle on June 13th, 1994, you never had occasion to visually inspect the exterior of that vehicle. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I never took a quick glance to see there was no damages, and that was it.
All right. Did you have to log on any particular form whether or not there was damages at any place on that particular
It's usually
vehicle?
marked on this. When we could look over the vehicle, make sure there's no damages. If they are, we mark them down on the impound sheet.
And that's called some kind of an inventory on this sheet that you have before you?
Yes.
And in completing that particular inventory form, for instance, the form is called inventory. It's near the middle of the particular form. Is that correct? Inventory?
Well, wherever it says remarks, that's where we put all the damages down.
Okay. And you have a Y column, I presume that's for yes, and an N column for no. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And did you fill this form out?
No, sir, that was already filled out by
All right.
LAPD.
It was filled out by LAPD?
Yes, sir.
When you got the form?
Yes, sir.
Where did you get that form?
From LAPD on Rockingham.
When you first arrived there?
Yes, sir.
All right. And so that we're clear, may I approach you, Your Honor?
You may.
This form, for the record, Your Honor, we are referring to People's 233, is it?
234.
234 for identification. If we can look at 234, this particular form where there's an indication of tow information, and inventory, these kind of X marks here under Y and N.
Yes, sir.
These were filled out by someone else, is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you fill out any portion of this form at all?
Just the part here for my signature is and the tow fee and the storage fee.
All right, you fill out just the part where it indicates garage employee, complete this section, and where it says garage employee signature, that's your signature. And your name is Bernie Douroux?
Douroux, yes, sir.
All right. Anything else filled out by you on this particular form?
No, that's it.
All right. And so, with regard to the inventorying the vehicle, you just quickly looked at it, is that correct?
That's correct. Just the exterior to make sure there was no damage, which there were none.
Now, you mentioned also, sir, that at some point you had occasion to glance inside the vehicle, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Just through the window, just to look, see if it was a lot of vehicles sometimes are four-wheel drives, so we just have to make sure they're not engaged.
All right.
But I didn't see anything when I glanced, so I didn't bother looking.
And where were you when you glanced inside the vehicle?
On the right-hand side, on the passenger side.
All right, and more specifically, what location were you at?
Oh, in the front.
No, where were you? With Rockingham?
Oh,
or
yes,
Parker
I'm
Center?
sorry. Yeah,
Okay.
Rockingham.
So as I understand it then, you looked inside the vehicle while you're still at 360 Rockingham.
Yeah, we just glanced in and looked.
And you did this from the passenger side of the vehicle, is that correct?
Just correct.
And you don't recall seeing anything that you noted inside that particular vehicle, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. This would have been shortly after you arrived, about 3:30 in the afternoon?
Yes, sir.
That you looked inside? All right. Now, when you went back outside after talking to the desk sergeant, you waited for a period of time of perhaps less than 5 minutes, and a detective came out, is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you know the name of that detective, sir?
No, I don't remember.
And you talked briefly with that detective, you had a conversation with that person?
Yeah, weather.
You talked about the weather?
Just weather and how, because it was a nice warm day.
Okay.
But other than that, no conversation.
June 13th was a warm day?
It was.
All right. And so after you had this conversation with the detective, did you then take the vehicle back over to the print shed?
Yes, we took it over there. He got in the truck and we went to
So this
the print
detective
shed.
rode with you?
Yes, sir.
All right. You went back to the print shed, and at this time, you gained entrance inside the print shed, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you, I presume, took the vehicle inside and parked it in some location, is that correct?
That's correct. I backed it in and dropped the vehicle.
And about what time was it at that time, sir?
Dad, maybe 4:45, maybe almost 5. About that time. It's
Somewhere around 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
I believe it was before 5.
All right. And you then left the vehicle, is that correct?
That's correct.
While you were there, did you ever see any person get inside that vehicle at all?
No, sir.
And did you ever get inside it?
No, sir.
By the way, do you carry, in the course of your work as a tow truck driver, do you have one of these things called a Slim Jim?
Yes, I do.
And that is a kind of an instrument that works to open vehicles, is that correct?
That's correct.
And with regard to that Slim Jim, you could open that vehicle real quickly, couldn't you?
Yes, I could.
I mean, you're an experienced tow truck driver. How long would it take you to use your Slim Jim to open a vehicle like that, Bronco? How long would it take?
A couple minutes. If I had to open it.
If you wanted to open it, a couple of minutes?
Yeah.
Did you see whether or not the detective who rode back over with you to Parker Center, did you see whether or not he had a Slim Jim with him?
I didn't notice one, no.
And did you ever see the detective open the vehicle while you were there?
No, sir.
You then left the vehicle, and that ended your involvement with this vehicle on that day, is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you strike that? With regard to the form that's before you again, People's 234 for identification, you were asked by Mr. Darden whether or not there was any indication on the form of whether or not this vehicle was locked, and you indicated there's no indication one way or the other. Is that correct?
That's correct. I really didn't notice the part up there.
All right. So look at it now for me, will you?
Yes, I'm looking at it.
In an area called stolen, lost, or embezzled, there's an indication in the right part of that block of whether or not the ignition was locked, right?
That's correct.
There's nothing checked, right?
Nothing.
There's an indication whether the doors are locked. There's nothing indicated, right?
Nothing.
All right. And you had not noticed that before you brought the form with you today, is that right?
That's correct.
You then left the print shed, and it was about 5 o'clock or so that afternoon?
About 5, yes, sir.
And what time did you check out that day from your, terminate your employment on that day, if you recall?
It's 7 o'clock.
And did you pick up any other vehicles on that day that you recall?
Before it was.
Oh, well, I didn't hear your response.
Before, a few cars before.
No, afterwards.
No.
All right. Maybe push for just a second here.
Do we have to?
Yeah, just to be very brief. Won't be painful.
All right, Mr. Cochran.
You done?
Did you write any other notes with regard to any of your observations on that, from that particular date, other than your signature on People's 234 for identification?
No, sir, that's it.
Pretty much it?
Yes, sir.
And with regard to your observations or lack thereof of things either outside the Bronco or inside the Bronco that you saw, did you write those down anywhere at all?
No, sir.
And you never saw anything inside in the interior of that vehicle, is that correct?
No, sir.
Never saw any blood inside that vehicle?
No, sir.
Never saw any blood on the outside of that vehicle?
No, sir.
Did you see anything in the rear of the vehicle at all?
No, sir.
All right. Thank you very kindly, Mr. Douroux.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Darden, any redirect?
Mr. Douroux, you didn't notice any unusual stains on the steering wheel of the Bronco?
No, sir.
You see any unusual stains on the console of the Bronco?
No, sir.
How about the interior driver's door panel? You see any unusual stains there?
No, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Cochran?
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you very much.
All right, Mr. Douroux, thank you very much, sir. Your excuse as a witness. Thank you for coming in. And if you'll give that document, please, to Mr. Darden. Mr. Darden, do you have your people's next witness available?
I think so. Just have one moment.
Yes. Yes. Change it.
Clark is prepared for the next one.
All right, give me 2 seconds here. Change water glasses here. Mr. Fairtlow, can we do that someplace else? Great. All right, Mr. Clark, you may call the people's next witness.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Robin Cotton, please.
All right, Dr. Cotton.
Please raise your right hand. You do solemnly swear that the testimony you may give in the class now pending before this court should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please have a seat in the witness stand and state spell your first and last names for the record.
My first name is spelled R-O-B-I-N, and the last name is C-O-T-T-O-N.
All right, Dr. Cotton, why don't you just lean back, pull the microphone close to you, please.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, may I reintroduce myself to the jury?
You may.
All right, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is George Clark. Actually has an E on the end, so I'm no relation to Ms. Clark. Thank you, Your Honor, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
I didn't need that disclaimer, Your Honor. My brother.
Dr. Cotton, who are you employed by?
I'm employed by Cellmark Diagnostics in Germantown, Maryland.
What is Cellmark Diagnostics?
We are a private company, and we do DNA testing for paternity and for criminal cases.
As far as your formal education, do you have any higher level or upper level degrees?
Yes, I do.
Could you describe that, please?
I have a master's degree with a major in biology, and I have a PhD with a major in biochemistry and molecular biology.
When you say biochemistry, could you explain what that is?
It's just the methods and information that's gathered by those methods in an attempt to understand basically all cellular processes.
When you say cellular processes, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, except for viruses, all organisms are made up of cells. Bacteria is a cell, a yeast is a cell, and we are made up of many, many cells, and biochemistry and molecular biology are the tools that a biologist uses to try to understand how cells function and how they are able to do the things that they do.
Could you also pull the microphone perhaps just a little bit closer to you?
How's that?
That's fine, thanks. You also described that your higher level degree was also in molecular biology, is that right?
Yes.
Could you describe what that is, please?
Molecular biology is sort of a generic term and really refers to a set of tools that biologists may use to help them understand any number of things. Maybe a biologist would use the tools of molecular biology to find out where a particular gene or genetic characteristic was, or they might use the tools to understand how a particular gene or genetic characteristic causes a cell to do a particular thing. And that can be applied to research in animals and research in humans, research in bacteria. It's really the set of tools that is used in understanding cellular processes.
To what extent did your formal education deal with DNA itself?
Most of my graduate, well actually, the work that I did for my master's degree didn't have anything to do with DNA. The work that I did for my PhD and research that I've done since then has all had something to do with understanding DNA.
All right, I'd like to return to your qualifications later. But first, what is DNA, Dr. Cotton?
DNA is that part of the chromosomes that carries the information that programs an organism from the point of conception, that is, from the point when an egg and a sperm come together. The DNA in the egg and the DNA in the sperm now makes up the total DNA for that organism. And the information in that DNA programs the development of that organism all the way through childhood, if it was a human, adulthood, and on through aging until that human being isn't alive anymore.
What is DNA itself? How would you describe it?
DNA is correctly described as a polymer. That is, it's a long series of components that are all attached together. And It's basically our cellular alphabet.
When you use the term polymer, could you spell that, please?
P-O-L-Y-M-E-R.
What role does DNA play in terms of inheritance from parents to children?
When the egg and the sperm come together to start a new animal or a new human being, the egg contains half of the DNA from that human being, for that new we'll talk about people, so I don't have to keep referring back and forth. People, animals, it's generic, but anyway, the egg contains half of that DNA for that new person. The sperm contains the other half, so we inherit one half of our DNA from our mother, and we inherit the other half of our DNA from our father.
As far as DNA's role in the body, and you've described the fact that it provides for the structure, for instance, of human beings, is that right?
Yes.
And when you say structure, or if I've used the term structure, what role does DNA have in creating our bodies?
You could take an entire series of college courses that would answer that question, so let me see if I can make a simple answer for you. All of the information that predicts our structure, our height, our build, our skin color, our organs. You have a liver. That information on how that liver is going to be formed as the organism developed is contained in the DNA. And the DNA does that by containing the information that's eventually translated into proteins, and those proteins do the major part of the work in the cell. And so basically the DNA contains all information to make a specific organism.
Sometimes the term genetic blueprint has been attached to DNA.
And it's a good description.
In what way?
Well, if you think of a blueprint as all, I don't know much about how you build a building, but if we make the assumption that a blueprint contains all the information for how to build your house, the DNA, the analogy is the DNA contains all the information on how to build you.
Where is DNA actually found in our bodies?
It's found in the nucleus of each cell.
Okay, do we have, and in fact, have you and I discussed the fact that you will be drawing some charts for this jury?
Yes.
And will we, in fact, be talking to your knowledge about some of these very same items that you've just described?
Yes.
Is there a term called chromosomes?
Yes.
What is that?
The chromosomes are really the DNA molecules packaged up in what's a more manageable form for the cell. There are 46 chromosomes, and you get 23 of those from your mother. You get the other 23 from your father. And the chromosome is literally the DNA molecule packaged up by some proteins. So we'll sort of disregard those proteins. We don't really care about those for purposes of this discussion. But there would be, since there are 46 chromosomes, there are really 46 molecules of DNA in each nucleus of each cell of a human being.
Would it help to illustrate that point about chromosomes and DNA for you to draw a chart for the jury?
Probably.
All right. Your Honor, then with the court's permission, may the witness utilize the tripod that Mr. Fairtlow has.
Yes.
And draw on a...
Could we possibly put this over on this side over here?
My only concern is that some of the jurors will be at some distance.
Well, the problem is the defense counsel needs to be able to see it as well. So what we'll do is after we complete the drawing, we'll exhibit it to the full jury panel.
All right, very well. And Your Honor, perhaps this, what will be, I believe, the drawing by the witness be marked as the people's next in order.
235. All right, first drawing by Dr. Cotton will be 235. Mr. Fairwell, is that about as high as that goes?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
You better use it.
And let's see if we can move that back back so we're not cutting off juror number 1.
I'm sorry,
I'll just ask Mr. Farrell to move that back slightly so we're not cutting off juror number 1 here.
I was going to suggest if we could use the other tripod for the drawings, it'll get it higher, I think.
I don't know
Perhaps.
I don't know that it's attachable to that tripod, is it?
All right.
Well, let's make do with what we have here,
All right.
and then we'll exhibit it to the jurors.
All right, Dr. Cotton, then with the court's permission, could you use this chart that's now been marked, or will be shortly marked, People's Exhibit 235, to describe for the jury this concept of DNA and chromosomes?
Sorry, Your Honor. It has to be turned a little bit so the defense can see it.
Well, counsel, who's going to be handling this witness on cross-examination?
I will. But
All right, Mr. Neufeld, why don't you sit over next to Mr. Goldberg there.
It's also probably Mr. Simpson's not able to see it.
I understand that, counsel, but it's going to be exhibited for everybody. We have to make do with the angles we have.
Oh, I can see it.
And is there a color, Dr. Cotton? Do you have a pen in your hand? All right, very good. Then if you could please, for the jury, describe, again, DNA and this concept of chromosomes and its packaging.
Let's go back just briefly to the fact that we have in each cell 46 chromosomes. These come 23 from mother and 23 from father.
All right, Mr. Goldberg, I'm sorry, can we just have you, Mr. Goldberg, could you give Mr. Neufeld that seat there, please, and just slide over a little? All right, proceed.
To make a very simplistic drawing of a cell, you have the nucleus somewhere in the middle, which contains the 46 chromosomes. The rest of the cell on the outside is referred to as cytoplasm. And just as fast as I write this down, you don't really need to know or remember this. We're just going to focus on the DNA that's in the nucleus. People who are expert at looking at chromosomes under a microscope can distinguish the 46 chromosomes as pairs because they stain slightly differently if you put a dye on them, and they have somewhat different shapes. So we'll just make a crude drawing here of a chromosome pair, and someone who is expert at this could actually say, well, this is chromosome pair number 1, and the pairs are numbered 1 through 23 and very well characterized. So to look at it under a microscope, if I could find each of the 2 chromosome number 1s, I couldn't tell which came from mother and which came from father by looking at them, but we'll just, in my example here, say that this first one came from the father and this second one came from the mother. Now, if you think of the chromosome as the packaging of the DNA, if you unwind the DNA from the chromosome, for each one, you would have a very long thread. And the best analogy that I can give to you is that it's not very different from going and having a spool of thread, and the spool of thread has dimensions that are maybe an inch high and an inch in diameter or something. But if you unwind that thread, it's many yards long. And in the same way, if you unpackage the DNA from each individual chromosome, it would be very, very long. And my drawing isn't at all in proportion. If I had chromosomes that were this size, and I unpackaged the DNA, it might be several stories worth of length. So it's a very long thread. If we then look closer at the DNA, we see that each strand is actually what's referred to as being double-stranded. And if we did this for an entire cell, rather than having just 2 chromosomes, as I've shown here, you'd have 46. So you'd have 46 long strands of DNA if you were able to unravel each chromosome and lay out each piece of DNA.
First of all, is this entire molecule of DNA, first of all, is DNA a molecule?
Yes.
Is this entire molecule the same in every cell of our bodies?
Yes.
In terms of this concept of chromosomes, if DNA were a book, would a chromosome be something like a chapter to the book?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Now you've introduced this idea of 2 strands. What do you mean by 2 strands to DNA?
You mean these 2 that I've drawn close together?
Yes.
We might want to go to an additional diagram to try to illustrate that better than I could draw it here.
All right, a diagram of a ladder of DNA?
Yes.
All right, very good. Your Honor, this second chart, would the court prefer to have it marked People's Exhibit 236 since the witness went to a second page?
Yes, 236.
All right. All right, I think we have a prepared diagram, Your Honor, that I'd ask be marked People's Exhibit 237.
All right, diagram 237. About right there for the time being.
Your Honor, while we're setting up the next one, can we show the ones that are already done to counsel, or would you rather we wait?
Hold on. We have a break coming up in 10 minutes, so we'll do the other exhibition at the break.
Your Honor, for the record, this chart could be identified as labeled at the top with DNA and depicting what appears to be a ladder with various notations.
Could you raise that up, please? All right, thank you. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Cotton, with respect to this diagram that's been marked People's Exhibit 237, can you describe for the jury, please, what it shows? And we have pointers right at your left hand there, if that would help.
This thing? No.
Left hand.
Or shorter than
this. Okay. DNA is 2 strands wound together in a helical formation. And the reason I didn't try and draw it, on my drawing here, I just do two strands side by side because I can't draw this shape very well. But the 2 strands are wrapped around as if you took 2 ribbons and twisted them one around the other. DNA has 4 basic components. They are referred to as bases, spelled B-A-S-E-S. So there are 4 bases that make up all the DNA, and they have the names adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. And they are abbreviated A, just by their first letter, A, T, G, and C. These 4 bases are the DNA alphabet. They exist along the length of the DNA molecule in a specific order, and that order has meaning to the cell. And it's just like if you look at the English alphabet, it has 26 letters, and you can put those letters together to make words, which in turn make sentences, which in turn make paragraphs. The order of bases or 4 components on the DNA has meaning to the cell, and that order is translated into information that the cell can use. The other important, or another important feature is that these 4 components or bases come in pairs. Along one strand, you'll have some particular order. So this order is first a G, then an A, then another G, a T, a C, and a T. Always across from a G, there is a C. So people talk about a base GC being one kind of base pair. Always across from a T is an A. So in the DNA, there are 2 kinds of base pairs, an AT pair or a GC pair. They are paired together like that, and the pairing is very specific because in the structure of the molecule, this distance from one strand to the other strand is constant, and if you add up the distance that a C takes, or the space that a C takes up, and you add up the space that a G takes up, it's always the same, and it is the same as the space that an AT pair takes up. So if you can think of it as if you had a zipper, but you had 4 different shaped teeth, and the zipper would only come together when every A was paired with a T and every G was paired with a C.
Would it then be correct that if a G was paired with an A, that it simply wouldn't match or stick together?
Well, if there was a single mismatch like that, then it would be very loose there. But you can't have a lot of mismatches or the 2 strands won't stay together.
Incidentally, this structure of DNA, as you've described it, when was it discovered?
The structure was discovered and published in 1953 by Watson and Crick.
Is that Dr. Watson and Dr. Crick?
It's Dr. Watson and Dr. Crick, and I believe that the article was published in 1950.
So a little over 40 years ago.
Yes.
As far as this diagram, and it shows these A's and T's that match at least in 3 instances, and then it looks like 3 more instances where the G's and the C's match. Is this simply a small portion of an entire segment or an entire molecule of DNA?
A very small portion. There are altogether 6 billion base pairs, and this is of course an approximation, but in human beings you would have 6 billion base pairs of information. One of the important things to note from this diagram is that when people talk about DNA, you can talk about DNA as being a particular length. It is possible to get a physical measurement of the length, but that's not the common way that it's discussed. Scientists talk about DNA in terms of how many base pairs long a particular piece of DNA is. So the particular piece of DNA that's on this diagram is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 base pairs in length. And you can discuss DNA, and it is discussed in terms of how many base pairs long is a particular piece.
When you describe the entire molecule being roughly 6 billion bases, is that in each cell of our bodies that has a nucleus?
Yes.
And in terms of the cells of our bodies that have a nucleus, is that all cells?
No. That is almost all cells, and the major exception, or the only exception that I commonly would refer to, in fact, I'm not sure if there are others or not, is red blood cells. And red blood cells, in the development and the formation of a red blood cell, the nucleus is lost, and there is no nucleus in a red blood cell. So if one were to get DNA from blood, the DNA is not coming from the red blood cells, it's coming from the white blood cells.
While we're on that topic, can you describe, please, what are the various sources of DNA? In other words, various parts of the body that DNA can be taken from.
Well, DNA can be taken from almost any source. You can get DNA from bone, from any tissue, liver, spleen, pancreas, kidney, brain, skin, if you have enough, blood, semen, hair roots, not the part of the hair that you're washing and combing is just protein. If you pull out a hair and you get the hair follicle with it, there are cells around that hair that are part of that hair follicle, and they contain DNA.
When you use the term follicle, is that the bulb-like material at the very bottom of a hair?
Yes.
All right. As far as this structure, and you've described on this chart the fact that DNA is shown here in a double-stranded form.
Yes.
Does DNA also, or can it exist in a single-stranded form?
It can be made to be single-stranded. It occasionally, in the process of making two cells out of a single cell, will exist for short stretches in single-stranded form, but that's, again, something we really don't need to be worried about. But experimentally, you can take a piece of DNA and either treat it with heat, which would be the common method, and if you think of this as a zipper, the two strands will simply come apart so that you would have one strand that had a G, A, G, T, C, and the other strand would have a C, T, C, A, G. So it's like unzipping the zipper. You can do that chemically, you can do it with heat, and because of the specific nature of the base pairing, you can also bring it back together. The two single strands will come back together as long as each G is paired with a C and each A is paired with a T. So it's like having that zipper have 4 different shaped teeth, and the only way you can zip it up is if all the teeth mesh together properly, an A with a T and a G with a C.
All right, Your Honor, I was going to have the witness start with a new drawing. Would the court prefer that now or?
No, we need to take a break for a juror issue. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please remember all my admonitions to you. Do not discuss the case amongst yourselves. Don't form any opinions about the case. Do not conduct any deliberations until the matter has been submitted to you. Do not allow anybody to communicate with you, and we'll stand in recess for 15 minutes. All right, and Mr. Clark, in the interim, would you show the exhibits, please? No, right there. Right there's fine. All right, thank you, Mr. Furlow. All right, let's have the jury, please. joined by all our members of the jury. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please be seated. And Dr. Cotton, would you resume the witness stand, please? All right, good morning again, Dr. Cotton. You're reminded you were still under oath. Mr. Clark, you may continue with your direct examination.
Dr. Cotton, with regard to this diagram that's on the easel at the moment, People's Exhibit 237, you described how that shows DNA in a double-stranded form, correct?
That's right.
All right. Could you, with the help of a new diagram, or actually would it assist in your describing DNA in a single-stranded condition to use and draw on what I believe would be People's Exhibit 238, a new chart, new diagram rather?
Yes, it would.
All right. Then with the court's permission, would you go ahead and use the drawing pad again to illustrate this single-stranded versus double-stranded DNA?
All I'm basically going to do is straighten out the helix to make a second diagram that's a little bit easier for me to draw. So if we make two strands, and now all I've done is really just straighten this out so that when you look at the bases, if you have an A on one side, you'll have a T on the other. If you have a G on one side, you'll have a C on the other. And there is a bonding between the A and the T and the G and the C that we're not going to bother to draw, but there's a force that is keeping these together. So you could make up any sequence here, T, A, C, C, G, for example. And if I have made up this sequence on this side of the double-stranded, then I would automatically know. I have a T on this side, I must have an A on the other. I have an A on this side, I must have a T on the other, and so forth. I have a C on this side, so I will have a G on the other strand, and a G on this side, so I must have a C on the other. And again, you can think about the size of the piece of the DNA that I've drawn by counting the bases. Here I have 7. So this piece of DNA that I've illustrated is 7 base pairs long. Now, if we take it apart, we haven't really left a lot of room here, but we'll just put up here, this is double-stranded. I think we better
Go to a new page. All right. And if we could make that 239, thank you.
I'm not going to be able to remember the same series of letters that I wrote down on the previous one. But if I took that piece that was double-stranded and I heated it, strands would come apart. So I would have nothing attached to this side, and I would have nothing attached to the other side. However,
I'm sorry, when you say you heat it, what type of temperatures are you talking about?
you have to heat it to about 95 or 100 degrees in order to get the two strands to come apart. And there are some temperature, some strands of DNA, if you had a lot of C's and G's, you have to heat those a little, you have to heat that a little bit more than if you have a lot of A's and T's. But basically, if you think of it as heating to 100 degrees, and when I say 100 degrees, I'm talking 100 degrees centigrade.
So not 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're talking about something that's very hot in terms of Fahrenheit measurement?
Yes.
In other words, not body temperature and not a hot day out in the desert, something
No.
much hotter.
Much hotter.
All right, go ahead.
If you wanted to put these back together, you can see that if you just move them back together, you were able to do that, they would all be correctly paired, and thus they could come back together and zip up. However, if I took this strand, say, and moved it down so that I had an A, or I was trying to put a T back together with this C, and an A back together with this C, and a G back together with this G, it would not come back together like that. It will only come back together when the A's and T's and G's and C's are properly paired up.
So therefore, DNA is at its happiest, would that be correct to say, when the pairs match up correctly?
Yes, it's happy and it's stable when they're paired up correctly. It's pretty happy when they're completely separate, but not as happy as when they're together.
As far as this ability to separate DNA and to have it return to its double-stranded form, why is that important?
It becomes important in the process of doing DNA testing and for many other reasons, because it allows you, suppose I have this DNA sequence, single-stranded, and I have this one in my hand in a test tube, and I mix them together. They will come back together. If I have some kind of a tag on here, some kind of tag, and the tag could be a radioactive tag or other types of tags. If I have this piece in a test tube and I have this piece in some other form and I mix them together and I let them come back together, they will zip up together correctly given some time, and now I can find out where this single-stranded piece has gone to by looking at whatever kind of tag I have stuck to it.
And is the ability to do that, or does that ability play a role in DNA typing itself?
It plays a role in every form of DNA typing that's currently used.
Okay. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, as far as this overall concept of what you've described, do we, in fact, to your knowledge, have a diagram that describes where DNA is found?
Yes.
Okay. With the court's permission, then, I'd like to have marked as People's Exhibit 240 a diagram entitled "Where is DNA Found?" All right, Dr. Cotton, we've had marked as People's Exhibit 240 a large diagram entitled "Where is DNA Found?" Can you tell us what that diagram shows? Sure. Why don't we move the... In fact, would you be able to discuss this diagram with or without referring to this particular chart that you've just made? Okay. All right, Dr. Cotton, if you could describe what People's Exhibit 240 shows.
This exhibit is basically a summary of the things that I drew earlier on the chart. So you have an example or a diagram of a cell that has a nucleus and a cytoplasm. And in the nucleus, there are chromosomes. Now, they don't have 46 of them drawn out here, but they have several, and the real number would be 46. You take one of those chromosomes out and unwind the DNA, this is a depiction of the DNA that's packaged up into the chromosomes, and if we make it larger and look at it still magnified yet further, you see again the double helix with the AT and GC base pairs.
So then does this chart, where is DNA found, then basically take step by showing with greater magnification each portion, or actually each way DNA is packaged down ultimately to the individual base pairs themselves?
Yes.
Okay. As far as this DNA molecule, and you've described it being the same basically in every cell that has a nucleus in our bodies, does that mean all of us are the same?
No.
Can you describe that further?
Shall I
Yes,
sit?
and if you would, have a seat.
Well, it's pretty obvious that we're definitely not all the same. All you have to do is look around the room and you'll pick that out right away. So within any given individual, in all of my cells, the DNA will be exactly the same from one cell to the next. And that would be true for each one of us. But from one individual to the next, the DNA will be different. Now, that isn't to mean that, we'll use Mr. Clark as an example. All the DNA in all of his cells is the same in each cell. That is, if you look at a liver cell and a blood cell, the DNA in the liver cell will be exactly the same as the DNA in the blood cell. His DNA will be different than anyone else's in the courtroom, but that's an overall difference. The great majority of the DNA, greater than 99% of the DNA, is going to be the same from person to person. And that's because we're all human beings. Our basic body structure is all the same. We all have a liver, we all have hair, we all have a kidney, and so forth. So all of that DNA information that creates those things that we have in common will be basically the same from one person to the next. There is then a small portion of the DNA that is different from person to person. And that's intuitively obvious because you can look around even in a very large room or many people, and you'll see that with the exception of identical twins, people are different, even closely related people. Two brothers are different. You can always tell them apart. And the exception is identical twins, and identical twins are identical because they have identical DNA. And that is the only exception.
With regard to, then, these portions of DNA where we differ, and I believe you said that's something less than 1% where we differ from one another?
That's right.
Why is that of interest? Why do you as a scientist care about that region or those regions where we're different?
Many scientists would not care about those regions that are different, but if you are interested in being able to distinguish one human being from the next, then it doesn't help you to look at the parts that are the same. In order to distinguish people, especially at the DNA level, you want to be looking at those sections of the DNA that are different from one person to the next. So you have to single out those sections, and for purposes of identifying or telling apart individuals, then you want to look at those sections of the DNA that are not the same from one person to the next.
You described brothers and sisters as being different and yet similar in some respects. Is that right?
Well, they will be similar in some respects because if you think about, you have a mother and a father, and they're going to have children. Each child will not get identically the same characteristic from the mother. So, but if you had 3 children, 2 children might get the mother's hair color, and the 3rd child might get the father's hair color. And the first 2 children who both got the mother's hair color, one of them might get the father's stature and be big-boned and tall, and if the mother was short and small-boned, then the other child might get that characteristic so that even though they had some characteristics in common, they both got mother's hair color, they don't have all their characteristics in common. And that's a very simplistic example, but it works.
So then children would or would not have the same DNA as that child's parents?
The child will not, definitely not have the same DNA as either parent because the child only gets half of the mother's DNA. So, and the other half comes from the father. So that child is a blend of the mother and father, and the child will not be identical to either the mother or the father.
As far as, and perhaps we can go back to the chart that's currently on the easel, where is DNA found? These chromosomes, do they package DNA molecules or simply a portion of the entire DNA molecule in a cell?
They package the DNA molecules in the cell. One chromosome can generally be considered to be a packaged up DNA molecule.
Okay. Now, this court has heard testimony about serology. Are you familiar with that term?
Yes.
Which, as the jury has heard, involves testing various genetic markers like PGM and EAP. Are you familiar with those terms?
Yes.
Is DNA different than the types of testing that go on that test proteins like PGM and EAP?
Yes.
In what way?
The protein markers that are mainly used in serology are coded up. That is, in some, you can think of them as a product of the information that's in the DNA. So when you look at the DNA, you are looking at the most basic level of information that you can look at. When you look at a protein, that is a product of the information that's in the DNA, so you're sort of looking at a secondary level of information.
So if I understand correctly, by typing a protein, you're really looking a little bit indirectly at the particular genetic marker. Is that right?
You are. That's right.
As opposed to DNA typing where you're looking directly at basically the blueprint itself.
That's right.
All right. Dr. Cotton, I'd like to take you back and shift topics a little bit and go back to Cellmark Diagnostics itself. Okay. First of all, how long have you been with Cellmark?
I've been at Cellmark about 7.5 years. I began to work there in January of 1988.
When was the laboratory itself formed?
The laboratory opened up in October of 1987.
What is Cellmark Diagnostics? What type of work do you do?
We do DNA testing, and we basically do DNA testing for two purposes. One is to answer questions in criminal cases of, and I'll just give you an example. If you had a blood stain and you had a known individual, could be a suspect or a victim, it doesn't matter, you would attempt to say, could the known individual been the donor of the DNA that was taken from the blood stain? It's exactly the same question that serology is used for in a crime lab. The other type of testing that Cellmark does is paternity testing, and for that purpose we're usually receiving a blood sample from a mother, from a child, and from an alleged father, and the question is could this alleged father be the father of this child, or is it impossible for this man to be the father of this child? And that kind of testing can be done using DNA.
Going back to your education, and you briefly mentioned the fact that you had a master's as well as a PhD, could you describe a little bit in more detail when you received those degrees and at what schools?
I received both a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science degree from Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, and both of those, for both of those degrees, I was a biology major. Later on, I moved to California and attended graduate school at UC Irvine and finished a PhD in molecular biology and biochemistry.
You touched a little bit on how DNA played a role in your higher education. Can you describe basically from your, and briefly, from your undergraduate work through your graduate work, what work did you do in the area of DNA itself?
Along the whole way?
Well, if there's a way of briefly summarizing it, perhaps you can package all 3 different degrees.
I did, for a Bachelor of Science degree, you take a series of biology courses and you learn about DNA and you learn some biochemistry and you learn some cell biology and you do laboratory experiments, and I don't actually recall that any of my laboratory experiments specifically had anything to do with DNA, but actually it's been a while ago, so I'm not really positive. And for my master's degree, I did do work in a laboratory, but that work involved electron microscopy, which is a method of achieving extreme magnifications, and that didn't have anything to do with DNA. In graduate school at UC Irvine, my research focused on DNA and how it is packaged into chromosomes and how the information in DNA is translated for the cell. And so for the 4 to 5 years that I was in graduate school, all of my research work had to do with DNA, and then I took the required graduate classes. And some of those had something to do with DNA and some of them did not.
As far as your graduate work, did it include actual hands-on work with DNA testing itself?
Well, it included a lot of hands-on laboratory work, because the whole point of being in graduate school is to learn how to do research. You just asked me whether it had to do with DNA testing. If you're talking about the kind of testing that Cellmark does, no, it didn't, because that wasn't being done at that time. It had to do with other aspects of DNA.
All right. As far as your employment, and then once you obtained your degrees, did you then seek employment?
Yes.
And could you describe where you have been employed in the past?
I worked for about 3.5 years in the Department of Biochemistry at the University of Iowa, and I did research there, which was also related to basically to how DNA is packaged up into chromosomes. And then I went to work at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, and I did research there for about 5 years, and that also involved DNA, and that, at that point now, did involve doing basically the same types of procedures that are currently used in DNA testing.
What are the National Institutes of Health?
It's basically sort of looks like, if you were to go visit there, it looks like a big college campus. And but there isn't very much in the way of teaching done there, or not certainly at the undergraduate level. There's some, but not a lot. And it's groups of researchers, and it's divided into different institutes. I used to know all the various institutes. There's a Heart, Lung, and Blood Disease Institute. I happen to work in the Institute for Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse. There's the NCI, National Cancer Institute. So I don't remember how many institutes there are in all, probably more than 20. But these various institutes all together comprise the National Institutes of Health, and the main campus for the National Institutes of Health is in Bethesda, Maryland, and then there are other areas where researchers are located also besides that main campus.
Once you left the National Institutes of Health, is that when you joined Cellmark?
Yes.
In what role when you joined them?
When I joined Cellmark, I was the Director of Research and Development.
Do you currently hold that position at Cellmark or a different position?
A different position.
What's that?
I am now the Laboratory Director.
In that position as Laboratory Director, what are your duties?
My main duty is that I am ultimately responsible for the scientific work that's done at Cellmark. So that's my sort of umbrella overall responsibility. My duties include, along with 2 other PhD staff, supervising the research that's done at Cellmark and reviewing cases that are done at Cellmark. When we receive samples in the lab and we analyze those samples and write a report, the person who has done the work at the bench, which is not me, signs the report, and and myself or one of the other 2 PhD staff would review the report and sign it also. And I testify in court when required.
All right, we'll return to both of those a little bit later. As far as your position as laboratory director, how long have you been in that role?
About 2 years.
This jury has heard testimony previously about an organization known as the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. Are you a member of that group?
Yes, I am.
Are you a member of any other organizations or societies?
I'm a member of the American Society of Cell Biology, the American Society of Human Genetics, and the American Association of Blood Banks.
The American Academy of Forensic Sciences, I assume the title describes it, involves forensic sciences. Is that right? And when you use the term forensic science, what are you referring to?
When I use the term forensic science, I'm generally referring to the work that we would do in the analysis of samples where a criminal case is involved.
The other organizations you described, and I think one of them was, for instance, the American Society of Human Genetics that you're a member of?
Yes.
Is that a forensic organization?
No.
What is it?
It's an organization or a group of scientists that are interested in that is, the scientists that are members of that organization would be interested in some aspect of human genetics. They might be interested in disease diagnosis. They might be interested in gene mapping. They might be interested in forensic science, but it's sort of a generic group of scientists whose overall interest would encompass human genetics.
I think you also mentioned, was it the American Association of Blood Banks that you're a member of?
Yes.
What is that group, briefly?
Mostly it's people who are knowledgeable and about the storage of blood and blood typing and the use of blood for medical purposes.
Such as transfusions?
Such as transfusions, and certainly that's not my area of expertise. The reason that I'm a member of that organization is that that organization has a program for accreditation of laboratories that do paternity testing, and we are a participant in that program. And they usually at their national meetings will get together scientists who are interested in paternity testing and have a specific forum for that small group. So that's a very small group within the American Association of Blood Banks.
Do you attend meetings as you're able to and as your casework permits of these organizations?
Yes, I do.
Do you present lectures at these meetings?
Not at every meeting, but I do present lectures at some meetings.
On what types of topics?
Generally, it's related to perhaps a new technique that could be used in criminal cases, or a case study that was done in a very unusual case, something like that.
All right. As far as publications, and there is scientific literature in the area of DNA, is that correct?
There's a huge amount of scientific literature generally in the area of DNA.
As far as that literature is concerned, do you attempt to stay current, or do you stay current on that portion of the literature that directly impacts your job at Cellmark Diagnostics?
I mainly am now able to stay current with the scientific literature on DNA as it impacts on human identification issues. I do stay current with some of the other literature, but it's in a relatively narrow area.
You've used this term human identification. What do you mean by that?
Basically, I mean being able to distinguish one human being from another, and as the ability of science gets more and more sophisticated in this area, given enough information, you can distinguish one human being from basically all others.
Incidentally, as far as the literature is concerned, do you act as a peer reviewer for that literature?
I am sometimes asked to review articles that have been submitted to journals and give my opinion on the quality of the work that's in that paper.
All right. I believe you described that one of your duties as laboratory director includes testifying in courts across the United States?
Yes.
have you previously testified in courts across this country?
Yes.
And I'm referring now to the area of human identification as a result of DNA typing.
That's the only area in which I've given testimony.
Could you describe for us approximately how many times that has occurred before today?
I don't keep a running total, but I've probably testified in about 90 or so cases.
Do you have any idea approximately how many states of this country that involves?
Well, again, I don't keep a running total of that, but I'm sure it's at least 20.
Would this be your first time in the County of Los Angeles or not testifying as an expert in DNA typing?
It's definitely not my first time in the County of Los Angeles.
Dr. Cotton, I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk with you about DNA typing itself. Is there more than one or just one approach to typing DNA for purposes of human identification?
There's more than one approach.
All right. Are there two primary approaches that are used commonly in forensic science?
Yes.
What are those called, first of all?
The two primary approaches are generally referred to by an acronym or their initials. One is called RFLP analysis. And that's the acronym standing for restriction, fragment, length, polymorphism. And obviously you don't have an explanation of that yet. The word polymorphism just is referring to differences, meaning it means many forms. So it is a technique that is allowing you to look at many forms of the DNA. And that's one major type of DNA testing that's done in this country today, and actually many other countries as well. The other type is referred to as PCR. Now, there are many different kinds of PCR tests, and PCR is the basic procedure that allows you to do the test. And PCR, the initials stand, and again, this won't make any sense yet, the initials stand for the polymerase chain reaction. It's a procedure, and that procedure can be applied to different types of genetic markers and different types of tests. But any test that uses that procedure is generally referred to as a PCR type test.
I'd like to start with the RFLP process first, if we could. And first of all, could you describe for this jury, taking weeks, what the RFLP process is and how it actually is conducted?
You mean, could I take several weeks to describe it?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sure we could.
I
don't think we want to do that.
To your knowledge, are we going to in fact limit it to something substantially shorter than that?
We're going to, based on my discussions with you, we're going to try to make it much shorter than that and pick out just those sections that are really important to have an understanding of what the final result looks like and what it means.
Okay. This RFLP process, when was it developed?
It wasn't developed on a special day. It's a series of procedures that all tied together are called RFLP. Some of those procedures were developed in the mid-70s, and some of the information that scientists needed to actually finally put all this together was not developed until the early 80s. So you can't give it a date, but you can give it a time frame from about 1975 to about 1985. The information that's used in RFLP testing for identification was discovered during that time frame.
Was there a time when locations on the DNA molecule that you've already described were found to be different amongst people, as you earlier testified to?
That's been known for a long time. Early on, of course, it was just known sort of intuitively that there had to be sections that were different since people are very different. the information about heredity and how it relates to DNA was described back in the late 1800s and early 1900s. But the discovery of the specific types of differences that this test looks at was basically about 1983, 84, and 85.
Was that as the result of, in particular, one or two scientists in this country and outside this country?
Yes.
Who were those individuals?
The two major contributors in this area, and again, it's very hard to say this because without previous information, they wouldn't have been able to make their major contributions. So you have a whole series of scientists that are kind of contributing here. But the two contributors to the kinds of information we are looking at in this testing would be Dr. Ray White from Utah and Dr. Alec Jeffries from the University of Leicester in England.
Incidentally, was Dr. Jeffries in England honored for any of his work in this area?
Yes, he's received several honors, including being knighted for his discoveries in this area.
By knighted, does that mean he's addressed as Sir Alec Jeffries?
I believe I know it's Sir, and then he's also a professor and some other things, so there's sort of a series of Sir, Professor things that go in front of his name, but I don't know that I could get it right.
I think they're called titles.
Did Dr. Jeffries play a role in any manner in the formation of Cellmark Diagnostics?
Basically, he did. The University of Leicester, where Dr. Jeffries works, owns the patents to his discoveries. So the series of events was he made these discoveries, certain of this information was patented, and the parent company that owns Cellmark Diagnostics purchased the rights to those patents, and they, along with Dr. Jeffries' help, did the developmental work to take it from, excuse me, being a procedure that he did daily in his lab to having a protocol that could be followed in what's more like a production lab, where you're doing the same type of test on each sample that comes in the lab.
Is there any relationship between your laboratory in this country as well as Cellmark in the United Kingdom?
Yes.
What's that relationship?
We are both owned by a parent company. The name of that company is Zeneca.
Was Cellmark in the United States formed before or after Cellmark in the United Kingdom?
I think it was just about a half a year after the formation of Cellmark in the United Kingdom.
As far as the procedures that were used at Cellmark in this country at its formation, did they have anything to do with what had been used before or even at that time in England?
At the time that Cellmark began doing casework in the United States, we were using the identical procedures to those that were used in England. Now our procedures are probably not identical. They don't do very much testing for criminal cases in that lab anymore, and so our procedures would no longer be identical, but they would still be very similar.
Incidentally, why don't they do as many criminal cases now in England?
There is a very large lab in London, and they do almost all of the forensic testing for the United Kingdom.
Now, with regard to, and you've used this term, RFLP typing process that we'll get into in a little more detail later, is this RFLP testing approach used exclusively in human identification?
No.
What else is it used for?
Let me give you an answer in sort of two phases. A very similar procedure can be used to identify animals, and in fact there is a lab in Oregon and another lab in Canada that uses the same types of procedures to look at poaching. If somebody has you know, some meat in their freezer and they say, well, this is just a deer, you know, and I don't know what the organization would be that would be checking on this, but whatever organization it is, they'd say, well, no, this is some endangered pronghorn antelope, or I'm sort of making this up, as you can see. Then they can use these same kinds of procedures to determine whether or not the meat in the person's freezer is in fact from a deer or from the endangered species. So that's a very analogous type of thing to what's being done in a criminal case. The general procedures that are used in this testing are used in genetic diagnosis and in gene mapping and in a lot of other research applications other than human identification.
Let me stop you and ask you about, when you use the term genetic diagnosis,